Hi, I'm Lisa Harper. Last Tuesday night at my 8-year-old daughter's piano recital, my ex-husband Derek stood up in front of 60 parents and teachers, put his arm around a 23-year-old blonde in a red dress, and announced to everyone that this was Chloe's new mommy. The woman giggled like she'd just won a prize. I sat in the third row, watching my daughter's face crumble on stage, and I did something nobody expected. I smiled. Not because I was okay with it, but because, in that moment, I realized Derek had just handed me the most powerful weapon I never knew I needed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Riverside Community Arts Center smelled like floor wax and nervous energy that evening. Parents clutched programs printed on cream cardstock, whispering about which child would forget their piece or cry on stage. I had arrived early, sliding into an aisle seat near the middle section where I could see Chloe clearly, but escape quickly if needed. My navy blazer felt too formal, but I wanted to look put together for her big night. This was her first solo, Recital, and she'd been practicing Chopin's Minute Waltz for 3 months until her small fingers could dance across the keys without hesitation. The auditorium buzzed with that particular energy of proud parents and squirming siblings. Mrs. Catherine Bennett, Chloe's piano teacher, stood near the stage adjusting the bench height for the smaller students. She caught my eye and nodded with the kind of warm smile that made me remember why we'd chosen her studio over the flashier options downtown. Behind me, I could hear other divorced parents navigating the awkward choreography of shared custody events. Who sits where? Who takes pictures? Who gets to post on social media first? I checked my phone for the 3rd time. Derek was running. Late, which wasn't unusual. But Chloe kept scanning the audience through the stage curtains looking for him. Through the gap in the burgundy velvet, I could see her blonde curls bouncing as she craned her neck, searching. My stomach twisted with that familiar cocktail of disappointment and protective fury. He'd promised her he'd be here. He'd even texted me that morning to confirm the time, adding that he had exciting news to share with everyone. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling 5 minutes until showtime. That's when I heard Derek's voice cutting through the murmur of settling parents. He was walking down the center aisle, but he wasn't alone. Behind him clicked the unmistakable sound of high heels on hardwood. I turned just enough to catch a glimpse without being obvious. The woman was younger than I'd imagined from Chloe's scattered mentions of Daddy's friend Amber. Much younger. Her red dress clung to her petite frame, and her blonde hair cascaded, in the kind of perfect waves that take 2 hours and a professional blowout to achieve. She carried a bouquet of white roses that looked expensive. Derek guided her to seats in the 2nd row, directly in front of me. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, something floral and cloying that made my nose itch. As they settled in, Derek's hand rested possessively on her lower back, and she leaned into him with the casual intimacy of someone who'd already claimed her territory. I forced myself to breathe slowly, focusing on the program in my hands. Chloe Harper, age 8, Chopin Minute Waltz in D-flat major, student of Mrs. Catherine Bennett. Mrs. Bennett stepped onto the stage, her silver hair gleaming under the warm spotlights. She welcomed everyone with the practiced grace of someone who'd been teaching children's recitals for 4 decades. The first student, a nervous 6-year-old boy, stumbled through Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, while his grandmother filmed every wrong note with unwavering dedication. Then came a teenager who played Debussy with the kind of technical precision that made the audience sit up straighter. Each performance built toward Chloe's moment. When Mrs. Bennett announced Chloe Harper, performing Chopin's Minute Waltz, my daughter appeared at the edge of the stage in her navy velvet dress with pearl buttons. I'd helped her pick it out 3 weeks ago, and she'd insisted on wearing her hair in a French braid because it looked fancy and serious. She walked to the piano bench with careful steps, her patent leather shoes reflecting the stage lights. Before sitting down, she did what she always did at home before practicing. She looked out into the audience and waved. That's when Derek stood up. I thought he was just waving back, being an enthusiastic dad for once. But he didn't sit down. Instead, he reached for Amber's hand and pulled her to her feet beside him. The gesture sent a ripple of confusion through the nearby rows. Parents, who'd been chatting quietly, turned to look. Mrs. Bennet paused, her welcoming smile flickering with uncertainty. Derek's voice carried clearly through the hushed auditorium. Before our daughter begins, I just wanted everyone to meet someone very special. He squeezed Amber's hand and she beamed up at him like he'd just announced she'd won the lottery. This is Amber Rodriguez, and she's going to be Chloe's new mommy. The silence that followed felt like a physical thing, thick and suffocating. I heard someone behind me whisper, "Oh my God," under their breath. Mrs. Bennet's eyes widened, and she glanced toward me with an expression caught between horror and professional obligation to keep the recital moving, but I couldn't look away from Chloe. My daughter stood frozen beside the piano bench, her small hands clutched in front of her stomach. Her face cycled through emotions too complex for an 8-year-old to process. Confusion first, then a flicker of hope as she looked between Derek and Amber, then something that looked like betrayal as her eyes found mine across the dim auditorium. I could see her bottom lip starting to tremble, the telltale sign that tears weren't far behind. That's when something inside me shifted. Not broke, not shattered, but shifted like tectonic plates finding a new arrangement. I had spent 2 years since our divorce trying to protect Chloe from Derek's selfishness, making excuses for his broken promises, smoothing over his thoughtless words. I had swallowed my own hurt 1,000 times to keep her world stable. But watching him use our daughter's moment, her first solo recital, as his personal announcement platform, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Clarity. I stood up slowly, my movement drawing attention from the parents who'd been staring at Derek and Amber. When I smiled, it wasn't the tight, polite expression I'd perfected during our marriage. It was something else entirely. Something that made Derek's confident grin falter slightly when our eyes met. "Congratulations," I said, my voice carrying just far enough for the first few rows to hear. What a perfect moment for such wonderful news. I turned toward Chloe, whose confusion had deepened at my unexpected response. "Sweetheart, why don't you play your beautiful piece for everyone? We're all so excited to hear what you've been working on." Mrs. Bennet, bless her, caught my cue immediately. "Yes, Chloe, please take your seat. We're all eager to hear your Chopin." She began the formal introduction again, giving my daughter something familiar to anchor herself to. Derek and Amber sat down, but I could feel their tension radiating backward toward me. This wasn't the reaction Derek had expected. He'd wanted shock, tears, maybe even a scene that would let him play the role of the patient man dealing with his difficult ex-wife. Instead, I had given him nothing to push against, nothing to use as ammunition later. Chloe settled onto the bench and adjusted her posture the way Mrs. Bennet had taught her. She placed her hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes of the minute waltz filled the auditorium, clear and precise. But I could see the slight tremor in her shoulders, the way she held herself too rigidly, fighting to keep control. As she played, my mind raced through calculations I'd been avoiding for months. Derek's sudden generosity with child support payments. His insistence on having Chloe every other weekend, even though he'd barely seen her for 6 months after our divorce. The way he'd been asking pointed questions about my work schedule, my dating life, my plans for the future. Questions that had seemed like normal co-parenting conversation, but now felt like reconnaissance. Amber shifted in her seat, crossing and uncrossing her legs like she was posing for invisible cameras. Her roses lay across her lap, and she kept glancing around to see if people were still looking at her. The attention was clearly what she'd wanted, but now that she had it, she seemed less certain about the quality of that attention. Several parents were indeed still staring, but their expressions weren't exactly welcoming. Chloe reached the challenging middle section of the waltz, where the melody jumps between octaves and requires precise timing. She'd struggled with this part for weeks, but tonight her fingers found every note cleanly. She was performing beautifully, but I could see the cost in the rigid line of her spine. The way she kept her eyes fixed on the keys instead of looking up at the audience like she did during practice. When she finished, the applause was immediate and genuine. Mrs. Bennet stepped forward to guide her into her bow, and Chloe managed a small smile as she curtsied the way we'd practiced. But as she walked off stage, she didn't look toward Derek and Amber. She looked directly at me, and I saw a question in her eyes that no 8-year-old should have to ask. "What happens now?" I clapped until my hands stung, stood up to give her the standing ovation she deserved, and watched other parents follow suit. The moment belonged to her again, at least temporarily. But even as I celebrated my daughter's performance, I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Derek had just made a critical error in judgment, and for the first time since our divorce, I wasn't going to let it slide. The recital continued with 5 more students, but I barely heard their performances. My mind was cataloging everything I'd just witnessed. The timing of Derek's announcement, the way Amber had preened under the attention, the calculated cruelty of choosing Chloe's special moment for their grand reveal. Most importantly, the fact that he'd done this in front of 60 witnesses, including Mrs. Bennet, who'd known our family for 3 years and understood exactly what kind of father Derek actually was. When the final student finished their piece and Mrs. Bennet thanked everyone for coming, parents began filing out toward the reception area where cookies and punch awaited. I gathered my purse and program, moving slowly enough to let Derek and Amber exit first. I wanted to see how they'd handle the aftermath of their little performance. They stood near the stage, Amber clutching her roses while Derek accepted handshakes and awkward congratulations from other parents. But I noticed the subtle signs of discomfort. Conversations were shorter than usual. Smiles seemed forced. Mrs. Bennet, who normally chatted warmly with all the parents after recitals, was conspicuously focused on packing up her music stand. Chloe appeared at my elbow, still in her navy velvet dress, but with her careful composure, starting to crack. "Mommy," she whispered, "what did Daddy mean about a new mommy? Are you still my mommy?" I knelt down so we were eye level, smoothing a loose curl away from her face. "Of course I'm still your mommy, sweetheart. I'll always be your mommy." Daddy was just excited about his friend Amber, and sometimes grown-ups say things in confusing ways when they're excited. She nodded, but I could see the wheels turning in her mind. "Will I have to live with her?" "We'll figure everything out together, okay? But tonight, let's just celebrate how beautifully you played. I'm so proud of you." I meant every word. Despite everything Derek had just put her through, she'd performed flawlessly. Derek approached us then, Amber trailing behind him like an uncertain shadow. "Chloe, baby, you were amazing up there," he said, his voice carrying that false brightness adults use when they know they've messed up but don't want to admit it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Did you see how proud Amber was? She was so excited to finally hear you play. Chloe looked between them, then back at me. "Can we go home now, Mommy?" The question hung in the air, loaded with more meaning than Derek seemed to grasp. Home. Not to his house with the pool and the big screen TV and now Amber's roses in expensive vases. Home with me, to our small apartment in the Hawthorne district, where she had her own room and her keyboard and her stuffed animals arranged exactly how she liked them. "Of course, sweetheart. Go get your jacket from Mrs. Bennet while I say goodbye. To Daddy." As Chloe walked away, Derek's mask slipped slightly. "You're taking this better than I expected," he said, and there was almost disappointment in his voice. I smiled that same smile from earlier, the one that had made him uncomfortable. Why wouldn't I? You've just shown everyone exactly who you are, Derek. That's actually very helpful. Amber looked confused, but Derek's eyes narrowed. He'd heard something in my tone that she'd missed. What's that supposed to mean? It means congratulations on your engagement, I said pleasantly. I assume that's what this is leading to? Because introducing someone as Chloe's new mommy is quite a commitment to make publicly. The color drained from Amber's face. Oh, we're not. I mean, we haven't really. Haven't really what? I asked, my smile never wavering. Discussed. Marriage? How interesting. Because in front of all these witnesses, it certainly sounded like you'd already decided to become a stepmother. That's a big responsibility. I hope you're ready for it. Derek put his hand on Amber's back, but she stepped away slightly. Lisa, don't twist this into something. I'm not twisting anything. I'm just clarifying. When someone announces a new mommy at a public event, there are certain legal implications that go along with that. I'm sure you've thought it through. I could see Derek's jaw clench, but before he could respond, Chloe returned with her jacket, and Mrs. Bennet approached. Our group. The elderly piano teacher's smile was polite but cooler than usual. Mr. Walsh, Ms. Rodriguez, she said with formal courtesy, I hope you enjoyed the recital. It was wonderful, Derek replied, his charm switching back on automatically. Thanks, you for everything you've done with Chloe. Mrs. Bennet nodded. She's a very special child. She works incredibly hard and shows real musical talent. Her eyes moved to me. Lisa, would you mind staying for just a moment? I wanted to discuss Chloe's progress. It was clearly a rescue mission, and I accepted it gratefully. Of course. Chloe, wait by the piano for just a minute while I talk to Mrs. Bennet. Derek hesitated, clearly wanting to insert himself into whatever conversation was about to happen, but Amber tugged on his sleeve. We should probably go, she said quietly. I have work in the morning. After they left, Mrs. Bennet shook her head slowly. In 40 years of teaching, I've never seen anything quite like that. Using a child's recital as a personal announcement platform. She paused, choosing her words carefully. If you need anything, Lisa, any documentation of what happened here tonight, please don't hesitate to ask. I felt a surge of gratitude for this woman who'd taught hundreds of children and understood what appropriate behavior looked like. Thank you, Mrs. Bennet. That means more than you know. The drive home was quiet. Chloe stared out the window, processing the evening in whatever way 8-year-olds make sense of adult complications. I let the silence stretch, knowing she'd talk when she was ready. Finally, as we pulled into our apartment complex, she spoke. Mommy, if Daddy has a new mommy for me, does that mean he doesn't want you to be my mommy anymore? I parked the car and turned to face her fully. Sweetheart, look at me. Nobody can ever replace me as your mommy, and nobody can ever replace you as my daughter. Daddy's friend Amber might become part of his family, but that doesn't change our family at all. You and I are always going to be together. She nodded, but I could see the worry still creasing her forehead. Will I have to spend more time at Daddy's house now? The question hit closer to my growing fears than she probably realized. We'll figure that out together, okay? But whatever happens, you'll always have a home with me. That night, after Chloe was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop. I pulled up Derek's social media profiles, which I'd avoided looking at for months. The photos told a story I'd been willfully ignoring. Derek and Amber at expensive restaurants. Derek and Amber on weekend trips to wine country. Derek and Amber at charity galas where tickets cost more than my monthly rent. And, scattered throughout, carefully staged photos of Derek with Chloe, often with Amber visible in the background or tagged in the comments. I scrolled back through months of posts, noting dates and locations. Derek had been building a narrative online, creating the appearance of a blended family while I'd been focused on just getting through each day. Every photo was calculated to show him as the devoted father with his new, younger, more glamorous partner. I appeared nowhere in this digital story of his life, but tonight had been different. Tonight, he'd overplayed his hand. In his eagerness to make a grand gesture, he'd revealed something crucial. This wasn't just about moving on or finding happiness. This was about replacement. Complete replacement. I opened a new document on my laptop and began typing. Not an angry rant or a list of grievances, but a careful timeline of events. Times Derek had canceled visits with Chloe. Promises he'd broken. Inconsistencies in his stories about work trips and weekend plans. Tonight's performance at the recital, with specific quotes and witness information. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with this document, but my instincts told me I'd need it soon. Derek had just declared war, and unlike 2 years ago when our marriage ended, I wasn't going to surrender without a fight. As I typed, I thought about my daughter sleeping down the hall, probably dreaming about playing piano on a stage where no one interrupted her moment with their own agenda. She deserved better than being used as a prop in Derek's new life story. She deserved protection. And for the first time since our divorce, I felt ready to provide it. The phone rang at 6:30, the next morning, jarring me from the first real sleep I'd managed since the recital. Rachel Kim's voice came through the speaker with barely contained excitement. "Lisa, you need to see Facebook right now. Derek's post about last night has 37 comments and they're not what he was expecting." I stumbled to my laptop, still in my pajamas, and pulled up Derek's profile. There it was, a carousel of photos from the recital. Amber beaming in her red dress, Derek looking proud and proprietary, and one shot of Chloe at the piano that he'd clearly taken with his phone during her performance. The caption made my stomach turn. "So proud to introduce my beautiful family. Amber and I are so excited for this next chapter with my talented daughter Chloe. Some dreams really do come true when you find your person." But Rachel was right about the comments. I scrolled through responses from Derek's friends, colleagues, and family members, and the tone was nothing like the congratulatory chorus he'd obviously expected. His cousin Marcus had written, "Dude, at her recital? Really?" Derek's college roommate posted, "Amber seems lovely, but maybe next time choose a different venue for announcements?" Even his own mother, Patricia Walsh, had simply written, "We'll talk later, Derek." The most damning comment came from someone I didn't recognize, a parent from Chloe's school, apparently. "I was there last night. That poor little girl looked devastated. Sometimes timing matters more than the message." I took screenshots of everything, then noticed something else. In the photos Derek had posted, I was visible in several shots, sitting in the row behind them. But he'd carefully cropped or edited me out of every single image. Where I should have been, there was just empty space or strategic framing that cut me off entirely. The digital erasure felt almost more insulting than the public humiliation. Chloe appeared in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes and still wearing her favorite purple unicorn pajamas. "Mommy, why are you up so early?" "Just checking some things for work, sweetheart. Want me to make you pancakes?" I closed the laptop quickly, but not before I noticed 2 more notifications. Derek's sister Melissa had commented, and so had Mrs. Bennett. Over breakfast, Chloe picked at her pancakes and asked quiet questions that revealed how much she'd absorbed from the night before. "When Daddy said Amber was my new mommy, did he mean I was getting 2 mommies, or that she was replacing you?" The matter-of-fact way she asked it broke something inside me. "Nobody could ever replace me as your mommy," I said, kneeling beside her chair. But sometimes when adults get married, kids do get bonus parents. Like how your friend Emma has her mom and dad, plus her stepmom Karen who married her dad. But Daddy and Amber aren't married. "No, they're not." She chewed thoughtfully. "So why did he call her my new mommy if she's not even my stepmommy yet?" The question hung between us, 8-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of what had bothered me most about Derek's announcement. He'd made a claim he had no right to make, using language that implied decisions had been made about Chloe's life without consulting the people actually living it. After I dropped Chloe at school, I drove to Blue Moon Cafe to meet Rachel. She was already there, laptop open and 2 coffee cups waiting on our usual table by the window. Rachel had been my college roommate, then my maid of honor, then my divorce consultant, and now my closest friend and occasional voice of reason. She worked as a paralegal for a downtown law firm, which meant she understood legal implications better than most people. "Okay," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking about this all night. What Derek did wasn't just tasteless, it was strategic. You need to start documenting everything." She slid a yellow legal pad across the table. She'd already started a timeline, beginning with our divorce decree 2 years ago and noting every missed visitation, every broken promise, every time Derek had failed to follow the custody agreement. Seeing it laid out chronologically was startling. The pattern was clearer than I'd realized. "Look at this," Rachel said, pointing to the last 3 months. "He suddenly starts being super dad right around the time he began posting photos with Amber. Perfect attendance at pickups, volunteering for school events he's never shown interest in before, taking Chloe on expensive outings that just happen. To include Amber, he's been building a case." "A case for what?" "Modified custody. Think about it, Lisa. Young, successful man with a stable relationship and a big house in the suburbs versus single mother in a 1-bedroom apartment working freelance jobs. If he can prove he's providing a better environment, especially with a maternal figure in the picture." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "But Chloe's happy with me. She's thriving. I know that, and you know that. But courts look at stability markers, income, housing, 2-parent households. And Derek's been systematically creating evidence that he's the more stable option." I stared at the timeline, seeing how Derek's behavior over the past month suddenly made sense. The unexpected child support payments that exceeded our agreement, his insistence on picking Chloe up from school instead of having me drop her off, the way he'd started asking detailed questions about my work schedule and income. Even last night's announcement fit the pattern. He wasn't just introducing Amber to the community, he was establishing her role as Chloe's maternal figure in front of witnesses. "So what do I do?" Rachel flipped to a fresh page. "We start building your case. Document everything. Every interaction, every conversation, every broken promise. Get character witnesses. Save those Facebook comments, especially the ones from other parents who saw how inappropriate last night was. And Lisa?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You need to consider getting a lawyer." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of research and phone calls. Rachel helped me compile contact information for family attorneys in Portland, cross-referencing reviews and specializations. By lunch, I had consultations scheduled with 3 different lawyers for the following week. But it was the call from my ex-mother-in-law that caught me completely off guard. Patricia Walsh and I had maintained a cordial relationship after the divorce, mostly for Chloe's sake. She was Derek's mother, but she'd also been a grandmother figure to Chloe since birth, and I'd never wanted to interfere with that relationship. When her name appeared on my phone that afternoon, I hesitated before answering. "Lisa, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling directly." Patricia's voice carried the refined tone of someone who'd spent decades navigating social situations with diplomacy. "I wanted to speak with you about last night." "Of course, Patricia. How are you?" "Frankly, I'm embarrassed. Derek's behavior at Chloe's recital was completely inappropriate, and I told him so this morning. That sweet child's special moment should never have been overshadowed by his personal announcements." I sat down hard on my couch, not trusting my legs to keep me upright. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot. Lisa, I need you to know that not everyone in Derek's family supports what he's doing. Melissa is furious with him. Marcus thinks he's having some sort of midlife crisis. And frankly, I'm concerned about his judgment. Patricia paused, and I could hear her choosing her words carefully. I've met Amber several times now, and while she seems like a nice enough young woman, she's completely unprepared for the responsibility Derek seems to be placing on her. She has no experience with children, no understanding of what co-parenting requires, and I don't think she fully grasps what Derek is asking of her. What do you mean? Last week, Derek brought Chloe and Amber to my house for dinner. Amber spent the entire evening on her phone, barely interacting with Chloe except to comment on her table manners. When Chloe asked if she could show Amber her drawing, Amber said she was not really an art person and went back to scrolling through Instagram. My heart ached for Chloe, imagining her trying to connect with this stranger who'd been elevated to such an important role in her life without her input or consent. But what really concerns me, Patricia continued, is that Derek seems to be making decisions about Chloe's future without considering what's actually best for her. He's so focused on his new relationship that he's treating Chloe like an accessory to his perfect family image. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet apartment, processing what Patricia had shared. Having Derek's own mother question his judgment was significant, but it also highlighted how isolated I'd become in dealing with his increasingly erratic behavior. For 2 years, I'd been managing our co-parenting relationship mostly alone, making excuses for Derek's shortcomings and protecting Chloe from the worst of his selfishness. I'd convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for what was right. That evening, while Chloe practiced piano in her room, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not the careful timeline Rachel had helped me start, but something more personal. A letter to myself, documenting not just what Derek had done, but how it had made me feel and why it mattered. I wrote about watching Chloe's face crumble on stage when Derek made his announcement, about the way she'd asked if she was getting 2 mommies or if Amber was replacing me, about the careful crop jobs in Derek's Facebook photos that erased me from my own daughter's recital, about Patricia's revelation that Amber had dismissed Chloe's artwork without a second thought. But I also wrote about things I'd been suppressing for months. The way Derek had started questioning my parenting decisions, suggesting that Chloe needed more structure and better influences. His comments about my apartment being too small, my income being too unstable, my social life being too limited. Criticisms that had felt like concern at the time, but now seemed like preparation for something bigger. As I wrote, a memory surfaced from 3 weeks earlier. Derek had picked Chloe up for his weekend, and when he brought her back Sunday night, he'd lingered in my doorway longer than usual. You know, Lisa, I've been thinking, Chloe's getting older, and she needs consistency. Maybe it's time to revisit our custody arrangement. I'd been folding laundry at the time, and I'd paused with one of Chloe's sweaters in my hands. What do you mean? Just that she might benefit from spending more time in a stable environment. Amber and I have been talking about getting her enrolled in some activities, maybe tutoring, things that require more regular scheduling. She's already in piano lessons and she's doing great in school. Derek had shrugged, but there was something calculating in his expression. I'm just saying we should keep her best interests in mind as she grows up. Things change. At the time, I'd dismissed it as Derek being Derek, making vague proclamations about parenting without any real plan behind them. But now, sitting with my laptop and Patricia's words fresh in my mind, I understood. Derek had been testing the waters, seeing how I'd react to the suggestion of custody changes. My passive response had probably convinced him I wouldn't fight back. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hi, Lisa. This is Mrs. Bennett. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from the studio contact list. I wanted to check on Chloe after last night and see how she's processing everything. If you have time this week, I'd love to chat. I stared at the message, surprised by the offer, but deeply grateful for it. Mrs. Bennett had witnessed Derek's behavior firsthand, and her perspective could be valuable if I ended up needing character witnesses. But more than that, she genuinely cared about Chloe's well-being. I texted back immediately. "Thank you so much for reaching out. Chloe is okay, but definitely processing a lot. I'd love to talk this week if you have time." Her response came quickly. "How about Thursday at 4 p.m.? I have a break between lessons. We can talk while Chloe has her regular lesson if that works." After Chloe went to bed, I called my sister Monica in Seattle. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear her kids arguing in the background about homework. "Lisa, everything okay? You sound stressed." I told her everything. Derek's announcement at the recital, his social media posts, Rachel's theory about custody modification, even Patricia's surprising phone call. Monica listened without interrupting, but I could hear her getting increasingly angry on my behalf. "That manipulative son of a—" She caught herself, probably remembering her kids were within earshot. "Lisa, you cannot let him do this to you and Chloe. Remember what he was like during your marriage? The way he'd undermine your confidence and then act like he was just trying to help. This is the same pattern, just with higher stakes." Monica was right. During our marriage, Derek had been masterful at making me question my own judgment. He'd criticize my career choices while claiming to support my ambitions. He'd point out my flaws while insisting he was just trying to help me improve. He'd dismiss my concerns while painting himself as the rational, level-headed partner. I'd spent 5 years walking on eggshells, trying to be the perfect wife for a man who kept moving the goalposts. I'm scared, Monica. What if he's right? What if Chloe would be better off with him and Amber? He can give her things I can't. A big house, expensive lessons, vacations. Stop right there. Monica's voice was fierce. Chloe doesn't need a mansion or a 23-year-old stepmother who can't be bothered to look at her drawings. She needs her mother, the mother who knows that she practices piano better after she's had a snack. The mother who reads her 3 bedtime stories because she's convinced 2 isn't enough. The mother who lets her wear her unicorn pajamas to breakfast because it makes her happy. After we hung up, I walked down the hall to Chloe's room. She was sleeping peacefully, one arm wrapped around her stuffed elephant, her blonde hair fanned across her pillow. In the dim light from the hallway, she looked impossibly young and innocent, too young to be caught in the middle of adult games and power struggles. I made a decision standing in her doorway. Derek might have more money and a bigger house and a photogenic girlfriend, but I had something he'd never truly understood. I knew Chloe. Not the version of her that looked good in photos or performed well at recitals, but the real Chloe. The one who sang made-up songs in the shower and insisted on eating her cereal in a specific order and still needed her nightlight even though she was 8. That Chloe belonged with me, and I was going to fight to keep her there. The next morning, I called the first lawyer on my list and moved my consultation up to Friday. Then I opened a new document on my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about Derek's behavior over the past 2 years. Every broken promise, every dismissive comment, every time he'd prioritized his own needs over Chloe's. But I also documented the good things about our life together. Chloe's straight A's at school, her friendships with other kids in our apartment complex, the way she'd learned to be independent and resilient, the Thursday pizza nights when we'd build blanket forts in the living room, the Saturday mornings when we'd walk to the farmer's market and she'd help me pick out vegetables while chattering about her week. Derek had made one crucial mistake in his campaign to prove he was the better parent. He'd forgotten that being a good parent isn't about providing the most expensive opportunities or creating the most impressive social media presence. It's about showing up consistently, listening without judgment, and putting your child's needs before your own desires. And for 8 years, through pregnancy complications and sleepless nights and toddler tantrums and homework battles and friendship drama and now divorce aftermath, I'd been showing up for Chloe every single day. Derek had shown up when it was convenient, when it looked good, when it served his purposes. But Chloe and I had built our relationship in the quiet moments between his grand gestures. In the everyday routines that didn't make good Facebook posts, but created the foundation of trust and security that every child needs. As I wrote, I realized something that hadn't occurred to me before. Derek's announcement at the recital wasn't just about humiliating me or establishing Amber's role. It was about testing Chloe's reaction, too. He wanted to see if she would accept this new family structure, if she would embrace Amber as a maternal figure, if she would be excited about spending more time in his household. But Chloe's response had been clear to anyone paying attention. She'd looked confused, hurt, and ultimately she'd asked to go home with me. Derek had gotten his answer, even if he wasn't ready to accept it. Thursday afternoon arrived with an early autumn crispness that made me pull out my favorite cardigan for the first time since spring. I dropped Chloe off at piano lessons and stayed to talk with Mrs. Bennett as planned. Her teaching studio was in the basement of an old Victorian house, warm and cluttered with decades of sheet music and photos of former students. "How is Chloe doing?" Mrs. Bennett asked as she poured tea from a thermos decorated with musical notes. "She's confused more than anything. She keeps asking questions about what it means to have a new mommy and whether she'll have to live with Derek and Amber now." Mrs. Bennett nodded thoughtfully. Children need consistency and clear boundaries, especially during family transitions. What Mr. Walsh did on Tuesday created confusion rather than clarity. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Lisa, I've been teaching children for 40 years, and I've seen many different family situations. Divorce, remarriage, blended families, single parents, grandparents raising grandchildren. What matters most for a child's development isn't the structure of the family, it's the quality of the relationships within that structure." "What do you mean?" "Chloe talks about you constantly during her lessons. She tells me about your pizza nights and your walks to the park and the way you let her pick out her own clothes even when they don't match. She lights up when she describes your life together. That's not the response of a child who feels neglected or unhappy at home." Mrs. Bennett pulled out a folder and opened it to reveal several drawings Chloe had made during the few minutes before her lessons each week. They were typical 8-year-old artwork, but the subjects were telling. Pictures of a small woman and a small girl at a piano. A drawing labeled "My Family" that showed 2 figures holding hands in front of a building labeled "Our Home." Another drawing of a kitchen table with 2 place settings and a vase of flowers. "She draws your life together constantly," Mrs. Bennett explained. "Children draw what feels safe and important to them. These pictures don't show a child who's missing something or wishing for a different life. They show a child who feels secure and loved." I stared at the drawings, my throat tight with emotion. In Chloe's artistic interpretation of our life, everything looked bright and happy and complete. There were no empty spaces where Derek should be, no longing for things we couldn't afford, no indication that she felt deprived or disadvantaged. "Mrs. Bennett, can I ask you something? If this situation ended up in court, would you be willing to testify about Chloe's well-being and what you witnessed at the recital?" She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. What happened Tuesday night was inappropriate, and Chloe's reaction made it clear that Mr. Walsh's announcement was as much a surprise to her as it was to everyone else. Children should never be used as props in adult relationships." When Chloe finished her lesson, she ran to me with excitement about the new piece Mrs. Bennett had assigned her. As we walked to the car, she chattered about the upcoming Halloween recital and whether she could wear her costume during her performance. Normal 8-year-old concerns that had nothing to do with custody battles or family drama. But as I buckled her into her booster seat, she asked quietly, "Mommy, am I going to Daddy's house this weekend like usual?" It was Derek's scheduled weekend, according to our custody agreement. But after Tuesday night, I wasn't sure what to expect. "As far as I know, sweetheart, has Daddy said anything different to you?" "No, but..." She twisted the strap of her backpack around her finger. "Will Amber be there?" "I don't know. Would that bother you? Chloe considered this seriously. She's nice, I guess, but she doesn't really know how to talk to kids. Last time, she asked me if I had a boyfriend, and when I said no, she seemed surprised, like she thought all kids had boyfriends. I managed not to laugh at this insight into Amber's limited understanding of child development. Well, even if she's there, you'll still get to spend time with Daddy, and you can always call me if you need anything, okay? Friday morning brought my first consultation with a family attorney. James Morrison's office was downtown in a sleek building that made me feel underdressed despite wearing my best blazer. Morrison himself was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of confident demeanor that suggested he'd handled plenty of cases like mine. I laid out the situation as objectively as I could, showing him the timeline Rachel had helped me create, the screenshots of Derek's social media posts, and my own documentation of his behavior patterns. Morrison listened without taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific dates or incidents. "Mrs. Harper," he said when I finished, "what exactly are you hoping to achieve? Are you looking to modify the existing custody arrangement? Or are you preparing to defend against a modification request from your ex-husband?" "I honestly don't know. I just want to protect Chloe and make sure her best interests are being considered." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Based on what you've told me, I think you're right to be concerned. Your ex-husband's behavior suggests he's building a case for increased custody, possibly even primary custody. The sudden improvement in his parenting consistency, the public introduction of his girlfriend as your daughter's new mother, the social media documentation of their activities together, these all suggest a coordinated effort." My stomach dropped. So what do I do? First, continue documenting everything. Keep a detailed log of all interactions, save all communications. Take photos of any gifts or notes he sends Chloe. Second, gather character witnesses who can speak to your parenting and Chloe's well-being in your care. Third, consider requesting a custody evaluation through the court. What's a custody evaluation? It's when the court appoints a neutral third party, usually a psychologist or social worker, to assess both households and make recommendations about what custody arrangement would be in the child's best interest. It's expensive and time-consuming, but it provides an objective analysis that courts trust. Morrison handed me his card and a packet of information about Oregon custody laws. "Mrs. Harper, I want you to understand something. Having money and a big house doesn't automatically make someone a better parent. Courts care about stability, consistency, and the child's emotional well-being. From what you've described, you have strong evidence of your daughter's happiness and security in your care." As I drove home, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved that Morrison thought I had a viable case, but terrified that it might actually come to that. The idea of Chloe being interviewed by court-appointed evaluators, of our private family life being dissected and analyzed, made me sick. But Derek had started this game, and now I had no choice but to play it. The question was whether I could play it well enough to win. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was making Chloe's lunch for school. The return address showed Derek's law firm, Hartman & Associates, and my hands trembled as I signed for it. I waited until after dropping Chloe off, before opening it in my car outside Lincoln Elementary. "Motion for modification of custody and parenting time," read the header in bold letters. Below that, Derek's formal request to the court, primary custody of Chloe, citing changed circumstances that affect the child's best interests. The petition was 23 pages long, meticulously detailed, and devastating in its thoroughness. Derek claimed I was financially unstable due to my freelance income, emotionally unstable following our divorce, and unable to provide the enriched environment that Chloe needed for her development. He cited my small apartment as inadequate, housing, my irregular work schedule as disruptive to Chloe's routine, and my single status as depriving Chloe of a complete family structure. But it was page 12 that made my vision blur with rage. Derek had included a psychological evaluation report dated 6 months ago during my brief stint in therapy following a particularly difficult period when several clients had defaulted on payments and I'd struggled to make rent. He'd somehow obtained my therapy records, and his lawyers had twisted my sessions about work stress and co-parenting challenges into evidence of mental instability. I called James Morrison from the school parking lot, my voice shaking as I read sections of the petition aloud. He listened grimly, occasionally asking me to repeat specific details. "Lisa, this is more comprehensive than I expected. Derek's legal team has been preparing this for months, possibly since last year. Do you have any idea how he obtained your therapy records?" "I have no idea. I never signed a release and I never told him I was seeing anyone." "We'll investigate that immediately. Unauthorized access to medical records is a serious violation. But right now, we need to focus on our response. We have 30 days to file our counter motion, and we need to start building your case aggressively." Morrison scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. Meanwhile, I sat in my car outside, Chloe's school, reading through Derek's character assassination of my life, and felt something shift inside me that went deeper than anger. This wasn't just about custody anymore. Derek was trying to systematically destroy my reputation as a mother, using my own private struggles against me in the most public forum possible. The petition painted a picture of me that I barely recognized. According to Derek's version, I was an unstable woman clinging to an inadequate lifestyle, while he was a successful professional, ready to provide Chloe with everything she needed to thrive. Amber was described as a loving maternal figure who has already formed a strong bond with the child and is prepared to assume full-time caregiving responsibilities. I laughed bitterly at that last part, remembering Patricia's description of Amber dismissing Chloe's artwork and asking if 8-year-olds had boyfriends. But Derek's lawyers had crafted a narrative where my knowledge of Chloe's daily needs and preferences was portrayed as hovering, while Amber's ignorance about children was framed as a fresh perspective that would benefit Chloe's growth. That afternoon, Morrison's conference room felt like a war room. He'd assembled a team that included a private investigator named Sarah Chen, a child psychologist named Dr. Martinez, who specialized in custody evaluations, and a paralegal who took notes while we strategized our response. "First priority is the therapy records," Morrison said, spreading Derek's petition across the conference table. "Sarah, I need you to find out how they obtained these. If there was a breach, we can use it to discredit their entire motion." Sarah Chen was a compact woman with sharp eyes who took notes in shorthand. "I'll start with the therapy office, check their records protocols, interview staff about any unusual requests or security breaches. If Derek or his team accessed these illegally, we'll have grounds for sanctions." Dr. Martinez, a gentleman, with gray hair and kind eyes, focused on the psychological aspects of Derek's claims. "Lisa, can you tell me about Chloe's behavior and emotional state over the past year? Any signs of distress, changes in eating or sleeping patterns, academic, performance, social relationships?" I described Chloe's thriving social life, her excellent grades, her enthusiasm for piano and art. I mentioned how she'd adapted well to our apartment, made friends with other kids in the complex, and seemed genuinely happy with our routines and traditions. "What about her relationship with her father? Any concerns about their time together?" That's when I realized I'd been unconsciously documenting problems for months without recognizing the pattern. "She's been coming home from Derek's weekends more tired than usual. She mentioned that Amber doesn't like kid movies, so they watch grown-up shows that sometimes scare her. Last month, she came home asking why I didn't have a boyfriend, and if that meant I was lonely." Morrison and Dr. Martinez exchanged glances. What else? Derek's been pushing activities that Chloe isn't interested in. He enrolled her in competitive swimming without asking me, even though she's afraid of deep water. When she cried during her first lesson, he told her she needed to be braver and that I was making her too soft. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through text messages from Chloe during her weekends with Derek. Messages like, "Daddy and Amber are fighting again," and "Can you pick me up early? I want to come home," that I'd attributed to normal adjustment issues. Now, they looked like evidence of an unstable environment. The swimming incident is significant, Dr. Martinez noted. It shows disregard for the child's emotional needs and preferences, plus an attempt to override your parenting decisions without consultation. Keep documenting these patterns. Sarah Chen looked up from her notes. "Lisa, I need you to think carefully about anyone who might have had access to information about your therapy. Did you mention it to Derek during any conversations? Did Chloe know and might have said something to him? Any mutual friends or family members who knew?" I racked my brain trying to remember. Then it hit me. Derek picked Chloe up from school one day when I had a therapy appointment. I was running late, and I called him to ask if he could get her. I might have mentioned why I was delayed. "Did you tell him which therapist or practice?" "I don't think so, but—" I paused, remembering something else. Chloe had my insurance card in her backpack that day because she'd had a minor scrape at recess, and the school nurse used it to check her tetanus vaccination status. Derek would have seen it when he picked her up. Sarah Chen smiled grimly. That's how he got the practice name. From there, his investigators could have posed as insurance verification, employment background checks, any number of pretexts to access your records illegally. Morrison leaned forward. If we can prove unauthorized access, it won't just discredit the psychological evidence. It'll show the court that Derek is willing to violate your privacy and potentially break laws to win custody. That goes directly to his character and fitness as a parent. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, we had a comprehensive strategy that felt both empowering and terrifying. We would file our own motion for primary custody, citing Derek's manipulative behavior, his disregard for Chloe's emotional needs, and his systematic campaign to undermine the co-parenting relationship. We would request a guardian ad litem to represent Chloe's interests independently, and we would push for a comprehensive custody evaluation that included psychological assessments of all parties. But Morrison was clear about the risks. "Lisa, custody battles are expensive, emotionally draining, and unpredictable. Derek has significant financial resources and a legal team that's been preparing for months. Are you prepared for this to get much worse before it gets better?" I thought about Chloe practicing piano in our small apartment, singing made-up songs while she helped me cook dinner, curling up next to me for bedtime stories. I thought about Derek's calculated cruelty at the recital, his violation of my medical privacy, his willingness to traumatize our daughter for his own purposes. "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." That evening, I had to maintain normalcy for Chloe, while my entire world felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. She chattered about her day at school, showed me a drawing she'd made of our apartment building, and asked if we could have pancakes for dinner because she wasn't in the mood for anything complicated. As she drew at the kitchen table while I made pancakes, she asked casually, "Mommy, why was there a man with papers at our door this morning?" My hand stilled on the spatula. "What man, sweetheart?" "When you were making my lunch, a man in a uniform came to the door and you had to sign something. You looked upset after he left." I realized Chloe had been more observant than I'd thought. "That was just some paperwork from Daddy's lawyers, honey." Sometimes grown-ups have to exchange official papers about boring stuff. She nodded, but I could see her processing this information. "Is it about me?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I knelt down beside her chair, looking directly into her eyes. "Chloe, I need you to know that whatever happens with the grown-up paperwork, you are the most important thing in my life. Nothing will ever change how much I love you or how much I want to take care of you." "Are you and Daddy fighting about where I should live?" The directness of 8-year-old logic never ceased to amaze and terrify me. Daddy and I have different ideas about what's best for you, but no matter what, you'll always be safe and loved, okay? She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her small body trembling slightly. I like living here with you, Mommy. I don't want to live somewhere else all the time. That night, after Chloe went to bed, I called my sister Monica and told her everything. The custody petition, Derek's violation of my therapy records, the legal strategy Morrison had outlined. Monica listened in increasingly outraged silence. Lisa, this is beyond the pale. Derek is literally trying to steal your daughter by destroying your reputation. You have to fight this with everything you've got. I'm scared, Monica. What if the court believes his version? What if they decide Chloe really would be better off with him and Amber? Then they'd be wrong, and you'd appeal, and you'd keep fighting until you found a judge with sense. But Lisa, you can't think like that. You have to believe in your case because it's the truth. Chloe belongs with you. Monica paused, and I could hear her thinking. You know what? I'm coming to Portland, this weekend. I want to meet with your lawyer, talk to Chloe, see what support you need. You're not facing this alone. Her words made me cry for the first time since receiving Derek's petition. Not tears of despair, but tears of relief at having someone in my corner who understood what was at stake. Friday brought Derek's scheduled pickup for his weekend with Chloe. I'd agonized over whether to allow the visit, given the pending custody motion, but Morrison had advised maintaining the existing schedule unless there were immediate safety concerns. Don't give them ammunition by appearing to violate the current order, he'd warned. Derek arrived at exactly 6 p.m., his usual pickup time, but Amber wasn't with him. He looked uncomfortable as I answered the door, avoiding direct eye contact while Chloe gathered her overnight bag. Lisa, I hope you understand this isn't personal, he said quietly while Chloe was in her room. I'm just trying to do what's best for Chloe. The audacity of his statement left me momentarily speechless. Derek, you obtained my private therapy records without permission and twisted them to make me look unstable. How is that what's best for Chloe? His face flushed. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you didn't know that announcing Amber as Chloe's new mommy at her recital would humiliate and confuse her. Chloe appeared in the doorway with her backpack, sensing the tension between us. Derek's demeanor immediately shifted, his voice becoming artificially cheerful. Ready for our weekend, baby girl? I thought we could go to that new indoor playground tomorrow. As they left, I watched through the window as Derek helped Chloe into his BMW. She waved at me through the back window, and I waved back, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. For the first time in 2 years, I was genuinely worried about what might happen during one of Derek's weekends. Saturday afternoon brought a call that made my blood run cold. Chloe's voice was small and scared on the other end of the line. Mommy, can you come get me? I don't feel good. What's wrong, sweetheart? Are you sick? My tummy hurts, and Daddy and Amber are yelling at each other. Amber said I was being dramatic when I said I wanted to call you. I could hear raised voices in the background, Derek's tone sharp and Amber's voice high and defensive. Chloe, put Daddy on the phone, okay? There was shuffling, then Derek's voice tight with irritation. Lisa, she's fine. She just wants attention because Amber and I were having a disagreement. You can't come running every time she calls. Derek, if Chloe says she doesn't feel well and wants to come home, I'm coming to get her. No, you're not. This is my time with her, and you're not undermining my parenting because she throws a tantrum. In the background, I heard Chloe start to cry, and something inside me snapped. Derek, I'm coming to get my daughter. If you refuse to let me take her, I'll call the police and report that you're holding her against her will while she's distressed. There was a long pause. Fine, but this conversation isn't over. I drove to Derek's house in West Hills, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The house was exactly what I'd expected. A sprawling modern construction with a circular driveway and landscaping that screamed expensive maintenance. Amber answered the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her previous polished appearance replaced by obvious frustration. "She's upstairs," Amber said without greeting me. "Derek's getting her stuff." I found Chloe sitting on the edge of a bed in what was obviously meant to be her room at Derek's house. The space was decorated in generic pastels with furniture that looked like it had been ordered from a catalog. Nothing personal, nothing that reflected Chloe's actual interests or personality. "Hi, baby," I said softly, sitting beside her on the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Better now that you're here," she whispered, leaning against my side. "Mommy, I don't think Amber likes me very much." "Why would you say that?" "She got mad when I spilled orange juice on the counter this morning. She said I was old enough to be more careful and that she wasn't going to clean up after me like a maid. Then Daddy got mad at her for being mean to me, and they started fighting." Derek appeared in the doorway with Chloe's overnight bag, his jaw set in a hard line. "Chloe, tell your mom what really happened. You threw a fit because Amber asked you to wipe up your spill, and then you decided you wanted to go home." Chloe looked between us, confusion and hurt written across her face. "I didn't throw a fit, Daddy. I was trying to clean it up, but Amber said I was making it worse." "That's not what happened," Derek insisted, but I could see uncertainty creeping into his expression. I stood up, taking Chloe's hand. "It doesn't matter what happened. Chloe called me because she was upset, and that's enough reason for me to come get her." As we walked toward the stairs, I caught a glimpse of the living room where Amber sat on a white leather couch, scrolling through her phone with the air of someone who'd already checked out of the situation entirely. She didn't look up as we passed, didn't say goodbye to Chloe, didn't acknowledge that an 8-year-old child was leaving distressed. In the car on the way home, Chloe was quiet for several minutes before asking, "Mommy, why does Daddy want me to live with him and Amber if Amber doesn't really want me there?" The question pierced through all my careful explanations and diplomatic language. How do you tell an 8-year-old that her father is using her as a trophy in his new relationship? That he's more concerned with appearing to be a devoted dad than actually being one? Sometimes grown-ups make decisions for complicated reasons that don't make sense to kids, I said finally. But I want you to know that you never have to stay anywhere you don't feel safe and loved. Will the judge make me live with Daddy? And Amber, even if I don't want to? I pulled into our apartment complex and turned to look at her directly. "Chloe, judges care about what's best for kids and they listen to what kids want too. If you ever have to talk to a judge, you can tell them exactly how you feel, okay?" That night, I documented everything about the weekend. Chloe's distressed phone call, Derek's refusal to initially let her come home, Amber's dismissive behavior, the generic child's room that showed no understanding of Chloe's personality or interests. I wrote down Chloe's exact words about feeling unwanted by Amber and her question about whether the judge would force her to live somewhere she didn't want to be. Sunday evening brought another development I hadn't expected. Derek called, his voice carefully controlled but with an edge of desperation I'd never heard before. "Lisa, we need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning after you drop Chloe at school?" "About what?" "About finding a solution that works for everyone. This legal battle isn't good for Chloe, and I think we can work something out privately." I almost laughed at the transparency of his strategy. Derek's weekend with Chloe had clearly not gone according to plan, and now he wanted to negotiate before we reached the courtroom where his behavior would be scrutinized by professionals. "Derek, you filed a motion to take primary custody of our daughter. You violated my medical privacy and tried to paint me as an unfit mother. I'm not sure what there is to negotiate. I'm willing to withdraw the motion if we can agree on some modifications to the current arrangement. More time for me, maybe some decision-making authority about activities and schooling. And what about Amber being Chloe's new mommy?" There was a long pause. That was poorly phrased. Amber and I are still figuring out our relationship. And maybe we moved too fast with including Chloe in those plans. It was the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I'd ever heard from Derek, and it told me everything I needed to know about how his weekend had really gone. But it also made me more determined than ever to see this legal battle through to the end. Derek, I'll meet with you, but not to negotiate dropping the case. If you want to discuss anything, it needs to be through our lawyers. Lisa, please. Think about what's best for Chloe. I am thinking about what's best for Chloe. That's why I'm going to make sure a judge hears the truth about both of us as parents. After I hung up, I realized that Derek's call had actually strengthened my resolve. His desperation to avoid court suggested he knew his case wasn't as strong as his initial petition had made it seem. More importantly, it suggested he was beginning to understand that taking care of a child required more than financial resources and good intentions. But I also knew this was likely to be Derek's last attempt at reasonableness before the legal battle became truly vicious. If he couldn't persuade me to settle privately, he would escalate his attacks, probably targeting my character and fitness as a mother even more aggressively. I was ready for that fight. For Chloe's sake, and for my own, I was finally ready to stop being reasonable and start being fierce. The courthouse felt like a cathedral of judgment, all marble columns and echoing footsteps that seemed to amplify every nervous heartbeat. I sat in the gallery of Family Court Division 3, watching Derek's legal team arrange their materials with the confidence of people who'd never doubted they'd win. Derek himself looked polished in a charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, playing the role of the concerned father seeking justice for his daughter. Amber sat beside him wearing a conservative navy dress that was clearly chosen to project maternal competence. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her expression appropriately serious, but I noticed she checked her phone twice during the preliminary proceedings when she thought no one was looking. James Morrison squeezed my shoulder as we took our seats at the respondents' table. Remember, today is just preliminary motions and discovery disputes. The real custody hearing is still 2 weeks away. But how Derek performs today will give us valuable insight into his strategy. The Honorable Judge Patricia Brennan entered with the efficient stride of someone who'd presided over hundreds of family disputes. She was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she'd heard every sob story and legal maneuver in the book. Her reputation for cutting through parental games to focus on children's actual needs was exactly why Morrison had been relieved when we'd drawn her courtroom. Derek's lead attorney, Michael Hartman, stood first. He was exactly what central casting would order for a high-powered family lawyer, silver-haired, expensive suit, voice trained to project authority and reasonableness. Your Honor, we're here today because Mr. Walsh has growing concerns about his daughter's welfare in her current primary placement. Recent evidence suggests that Ms. Harper's emotional instability and financial precariousness are creating an environment that no longer serves Chloe's best interests. Hartman walked to an easel and flipped to a poster-sized chart showing comparative income figures, housing square footage, and educational opportunities. It was a masterpiece of selective presentation that made Derek look like a pillar of stability, while reducing my life to a series of inadequate numbers. Mr. Walsh has recently committed to a stable, long-term relationship with Ms. Rodriguez, who has already begun assuming maternal responsibilities for Chloe. This provides the child with the two-parent household structure that research consistently shows benefits developing children. Judge Brennan's expression remained neutral, but I caught her glance toward Amber when Hartman mentioned maternal responsibilities. Amber straightened in her seat, clearly aware she was being scrutinized. Hartman continued for 20 minutes, painting Derek as the evolved co-parent who'd recognized his daughter's changing needs and stepped up to provide comprehensive care. He glossed over Derek's history of inconsistent involvement, reframing his previous absences as allowing Ms. Harper space to adjust to the divorce, rather than abandonment. When Morrison stood for our response, the contrast was immediate. Where Hartman projected polished authority, Morrison radiated quiet competence and genuine concern. He'd advised me to dress professionally but not expensively, to project stability without seeming to try too hard to impress. Your Honor, Mr. Walsh's petition reads like a real estate prospectus rather than a custody request. He's asking this court to relocate a thriving, happy child based on square footage and bank balances rather than actual parenting quality or the child's expressed preferences. Morrison moved to his own easel, displaying photos of Chloe's artwork, her report cards showing straight A's, and testimonial letters from her teachers, Mrs. Bennett, and even some parents from her school. Chloe Harper is an 8-year-old girl who knows exactly where she feels safe, loved, and understood. She spent her entire life in her mother's primary care, and every indicator suggests she's thriving in that environment. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. Mr. Walsh's petition is particularly troubling because it relies on unlawfully obtained medical records and misrepresents normal therapeutic processing of life stress as mental instability. More concerning is the timing of his sudden parental awakening, which coincides suspiciously with his desire to present himself as a family man to his new girlfriend. Hartman shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making inflammatory accusations without evidentiary support. Sustained. But barely, Judge Brennan said dryly. Mr. Morrison, keep your arguments focused on the evidence before us. Morrison nodded. Of course, Your Honor. The evidence before us includes documented instances of Mr. Walsh making unilateral decisions about Chloe's activities without consulting Ms. Harper, creating conflict and confusion for the child. It includes his announcement of Ms. Rodriguez's role as new mommy at a public event, traumatizing Chloe during what should have been a celebration of her achievements. Judge Brennan leaned forward slightly. Mr. Morrison, I'd like to hear more about this incident. When and where did this announcement occur? At Chloe's piano recital, Your Honor. Mr. Walsh stood up in front of 60 parents and teachers to introduce Ms. Rodriguez as Chloe's new mommy, without any prior discussion with Ms. Harper, or, apparently, with Chloe herself. We have multiple witnesses who observed the child's distressed reaction. For the first time, Derek's composure cracked slightly. He whispered something urgent. To Hartman, who nodded grimly. Furthermore, Morrison continued, we have serious concerns about the stability of Mr. Walsh's household. Ms. Rodriguez has no experience with children, no established relationship with Chloe beyond a few supervised visits, and has demonstrated concerning judgment in her interactions with the child. Judge Brennan made notes as Morrison spoke. When he finished, she addressed both legal teams directly. I'm going to cut to the heart of this matter. Mr. Hartman, your client's petition raises serious allegations about Ms. Harper's fitness as a parent. However, Mr. Morrison raises equally serious concerns about Mr. Walsh's judgment and motives. I'm ordering a comprehensive custody evaluation to be completed within 6 weeks. My heart sank. A custody evaluation meant months of interviews, psychological testing, home visits, and having our family life dissected by strangers. It also meant Chloe would be questioned extensively about her preferences and feelings, something I'd hoped to avoid. Judge Brennan continued, I'm also appointing a guardian ad litem to represent Chloe's interests independently throughout these proceedings. In the meantime, the current custody arrangement remains in effect, but I want both parties to understand that any attempts to influence the child's statements to the evaluators or guardian ad litem will be viewed extremely unfavorably by this court. She fixed Derek with a stern look. Mr. Walsh, that includes any further public announcements about family structure or parental roles without prior court approval. Ms. Harper, that includes any attempts to restrict reasonable access or badmouth. Mr. Walsh to your daughter. Are we clear? Both sides nodded, but I could see Derek's frustration at being singled out for the public announcement restriction. Hartman was already whispering damage control strategies. One more thing. Judge Brennan added, "I want both households evaluated in their current state. Mr. Walsh, if you're planning any major changes to your living situation or relationship status, those changes will be scrutinized as part of the evaluation process. The court needs to assess stability, not possibilities." As we filed out of the courtroom, I felt simultaneously relieved and terrified. Relieved that Judge Brennan had clearly seen through some of Derek's presentation, but terrified about what the next 6 weeks would bring. Custody evaluations were notoriously unpredictable, and Derek still had significant advantages in terms of financial resources and surface-level stability markers. Morrison walked me to the parking garage, reviewing what would happen next. "The evaluator will be Dr. Elizabeth Santos. She's excellent, very thorough, and she has a reputation for seeing through parental performance to focus on children's actual needs. She'll interview you, Derek, Amber, and Chloe separately, plus she'll conduct home visits and speak with collateral witnesses. What should I expect from the interviews? Honesty above all else. Dr. Santos will ask about your parenting philosophy, your relationship with Chloe, your concerns about Derek's household, your plans for the future. She'll also ask some difficult questions about your therapy and your emotional stability. Don't get defensive, just answer directly." That evening, I had to explain to Chloe that some new people would be talking with her about our family situation. I dreaded this conversation, knowing that 8-year-olds shouldn't have to bear the weight of adult legal battles. "Remember how I told you that Daddy and I had different ideas about what's best for you?" I said as we sat on her bed after story time. "Well, sometimes when parents can't agree, a judge asks special helpers to talk with everyone and figure out what would make you happiest." Chloe twisted her stuffed elephant's ear between her fingers, a nervous habit she'd developed recently. "Will I have to choose between you and Daddy?" "No, sweetheart. You just have to tell the truth about how you feel and what you want. These helpers are really good at understanding kids, and they just want to make sure you're safe and happy." "What if I say the wrong thing?" "There's no wrong thing to say. Just tell them what's true for you." But even as I said it, I worried about the pressure Chloe would feel during these interviews. She was a people-pleaser by nature, sensitive to adult emotions and prone to saying what she thought others wanted to hear. The thought of her being questioned about her loyalty to either parent made me physically sick. The first home visit from Dr. Santos came on a Thursday afternoon. She was a compact woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes and the kind of presence that immediately put children at ease. She spent an hour observing Chloe and me in our normal routine, watching us make dinner together, helping with homework, and reading bedtime stories. "Your apartment is smaller than what I usually see in these cases," Dr. Santos said as we sat in my tiny living room after Chloe went to sleep. "How do you feel that impacts Chloe's daily life?" "She has her own room, space to practice piano, and honestly, she's never complained about the size. We're close to her school, she has friends in the building, and we've created routines that work for us here." Dr. Santos made notes without revealing her thoughts. "Tell me about Chloe's relationship with her father." I chose my words carefully, knowing that any hint of parental alienation could be used against me. "Derek loves Chloe, and she loves him. They have fun together when he's focused on her. My concerns are about consistency and his tendency to make decisions about her life without considering her actual needs or preferences." "Can you give me specific examples?" I described the swimming lessons Chloe had dreaded, the advanced math tutoring Derek had insisted on despite her being grade appropriate. In mathematics, and most recently, the public announcement about Amber's role without any preparation or discussion. "What are your thoughts about Ms. Rodriguez's relationship with Chloe?" "I think Amber is trying to be kind, but she doesn't understand children. She expects Chloe to behave like a small adult rather than an 8-year-old, and when Chloe acts her age, Amber gets frustrated." Dr. Santos spent another hour asking about my work, my support system, my therapy, and my plans for the future. Her questions were probing but not hostile, and I got the sense that she was genuinely trying to understand our family dynamics rather than looking for ammunition for either side. 3 days later, Derek's home visit took place. I wasn't present, obviously, but Chloe's report afterward was illuminating. "Dr. Santos was nice," she said as I picked her up from Derek's house. "She asked me lots of questions about my room there and what we do on weekends." "What did you tell her?" I told her the truth. That the room is pretty, but it doesn't feel like mine because none of my stuff is there. And that sometimes Daddy and Amber watch grown-up movies that are scary, and when I ask to change the channel, Amber says I need to learn to like more sophisticated entertainment. My jaw clenched, but I kept my voice neutral. What else did she ask about? She wanted to know if I felt safe at Daddy's house, and I said yes, but also that I get homesick there. She asked what I missed most about home, and I said cooking with you and how you let me arrange my stuffed animals however I want. Did she ask about Amber? Yeah. She asked if Amber was nice to me, and I said she tries to be nice, but she doesn't understand kid things. Like, she doesn't know that I don't like mushrooms, or that I need my nightlight, or that I can't fall asleep if there's loud music playing. These details painted a picture that no amount of financial stability could overcome. Derek might be able to provide Chloe with a bigger room and more expensive activities, but Amber clearly didn't understand the small daily acts of care that made a child feel truly at home. The individual interviews took place the following week. Mine lasted 3 hours and covered everything from my childhood to my marriage, to Derek to my current parenting practices. Dr. Santos asked pointed questions about my therapy, my work stress, and my emotional support systems. She also asked about my concerns regarding Derek's household and my thoughts on co-parenting challenges. Ms. Harper, Mr. Walsh claims that you've been resistant to his attempts to take a more active role in Chloe's life. How do you respond to that? I've never been resistant to Derek being more involved. I've been resistant to him making unilateral decisions about Chloe's life and presenting them as joint parenting when we've never discussed them. There's a difference between being an active parent and being a controlling parent. Can you elaborate on that distinction? An active parent communicates with their co-parent about decisions that affect the child. They consider the child's preferences and emotional needs, not just what looks good from the outside. A controlling parent makes decisions based on their own agenda and expects everyone else to adapt. Dr. Santos made extensive notes. What would an ideal co-parenting relationship look like to you? Regular communication about Chloe's needs, joint decision-making about major issues like education and healthcare, and both households working to make Chloe feel secure and loved. Most importantly, putting her emotional well-being ahead of our adult conflicts. Do you believe that's possible with Mr. Walsh? I paused, considering how to answer honestly without sounding vindictive. I believe Derek wants what's best for Chloe, but I think his definition of best is heavily influenced by what makes him look like a successful father, rather than what actually serves Chloe's daily emotional needs. 2 days later, I received a call that changed everything. Sarah Chen, our private investigator, had discovered that Derek's therapy record acquisition was even more problematic than we'd initially thought. Lisa, I found the source. Derek hired a private investigation firm called Blackstone Associates 6 months ago. They used pretextual phone calls to your therapist's office, claiming to be conducting background checks for a potential employer. They obtained not just your therapy records, but also your financial information and employment history. Morrison was ecstatic when I relayed this information. This is illegal on multiple levels: identity theft, medical privacy violations, possibly even fraud. We can file criminal charges, but more importantly for our case, it completely undermines Derek's credibility with the court. What does this mean for the custody evaluation? It means Dr. Santos will know that Derek was willing to break laws to gain advantage in a custody case. That goes directly to his character and judgment as a parent. The revelation about Derek's illegal investigation campaign came just as Dr. Santos was conducting her interviews with Derek and Amber. I didn't know exactly what was said during those sessions, but Derek's behavior afterward suggested they hadn't gone well. He started calling more frequently, asking to speak with Chloe during my custody time, questioning her about her conversations with Dr. Santos, and making increasingly desperate attempts to position himself as the more stable parent option. "Chloe tells me you've been letting her stay up late on school nights," he said during one particularly transparent fishing expedition. "Derek, Chloe's bedtime is 8:30 every school night, and has been since she was 6. She's never been late to school or shown any signs of sleep deprivation. Well, she mentioned being tired after staying with you." "She mentioned being tired after staying with you too, actually. She said you and Amber watch late movies and the volume keeps her awake." There was a pause. "We'll address that." But it was Amber's interview with Dr. Santos that apparently caused the most damage to Derek's case. Through Chloe's innocent reports, I learned that Amber had struggled to answer basic questions about child development, Chloe's specific needs and preferences, and her own preparation for potential step-parent responsibilities. Dr. Santos asked, "Amber, what she would do if I was sad or scared?" Chloe reported after her last visit to Derek's house. "Amber said she would probably call Daddy because she's not good with emotional stuff." Then Dr. Santos asked what my favorite foods are, and Amber said she didn't really know because I'm a picky eater. What did you think about that? I'm not a picky eater. I just don't like mushrooms and olives. That's only 2 things. These small revelations accumulated into a picture of a woman who'd been thrust into a maternal role she was completely unprepared for, with a man who was more interested in the appearance of family stability than the actual work of understanding his daughter's needs. The final home visit occurred on a Saturday morning when Chloe was at Derek's house. Dr. Santos wanted to observe their natural family dynamic without the pressure of my presence. According to Chloe's later account, it hadn't gone well. Amber got frustrated because I spilled syrup on my pajamas during breakfast, and she said I was being careless on purpose. Then when Dr. Santos asked if we could show her my room, Amber realized she'd forgotten to put clean sheets on the bed like Daddy told her to. What did Daddy do? He got embarrassed and started being extra nice to me, like when he wants to impress someone. He kept asking if I wanted to show Dr. Santos my art supplies or play piano, but I could tell he was nervous. How did that make you feel? Chloe considered this seriously. Like he was pretending to be a different daddy than normal. Dr. Santos asked me about that too. A week later, Dr. Santos requested a final interview with me to clarify some points and discuss her preliminary observations. Her office was decorated with children's artwork and had the comfortable, lived-in feeling of someone who genuinely enjoyed working with families. "Ms. Harper, I've completed my evaluation, and I'll be submitting my report to the court next week. I can't discuss my specific recommendations, but I wanted to ask if you have any final thoughts or concerns you'd like me to consider. Just that whatever the court decides, I hope it's based on what actually serves Chloe's emotional and developmental needs, not what looks best on paper. She's a happy, secure child who deserves to stay that way." Dr. Santos nodded thoughtfully. "What would you say is the most important thing for the court to understand about your relationship with Chloe?" "That we know each other, really know each other. I know that she hums when she's concentrating, that she needs to arrange her stuffed animals in a specific order before bed, that she cries during movies even when they're comedies because she has deep empathy for characters. I know these things because I pay attention to who she actually is, not who I want her to be." "And what would you want Chloe to know about this whole process?" "That none of this changes how much I love her or how proud I am to be her mother. That adults sometimes make things more complicated than they need to be. But that doesn't mean children are responsible for fixing adult problems." As I left Dr. Santos's office, I felt a strange combination of exhaustion and anticipation. We'd done everything we could to present our case honestly and completely. Now we had to wait for her report and trust that the truth would be compelling, enough to outweigh Derek's financial advantages. But I also knew that regardless of what Dr. Santos recommended, Derek wasn't going to give up easily. He'd invested too much in this campaign to accept defeat gracefully. The real battle was still ahead of us, in the courtroom where a judge would ultimately decide where Chloe belonged. That night, as I watched my daughter practice piano in our small living room, her blonde curls catching the lamplight as her fingers moved confidently across the keys, I made myself a promise. Whatever Derek threw at us next, whatever legal strategies his team deployed, I would never stop fighting for her right to remain in the home where she felt truly known and loved. The music she played was complex now, far beyond the simple pieces she'd started with years ago. But the foundation was the same: careful attention to each note, patience with the learning process, and joy in the daily practice of getting better. It was the perfect metaphor for what we'd built together, and I wasn't going to let anyone tear it down without the fight of my life. Dr. Santos's report arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, delivered by courier in a sealed envelope marked "Confidential. Family court use only." Morrison called within an hour of receiving his copy, his voice carrying barely contained excitement. "Lisa, you need to sit down. Dr. Santos not only recommends maintaining your primary custody, she recommends supervised visitation for Derek until he completes parenting classes and demonstrates stable judgment regarding Chloe's emotional needs." My knees gave out, and I sank onto my kitchen chair. What exactly did she say? She was thorough and devastating. She documented Derek's illegal acquisition of your medical records, his pattern of making unilateral decisions without considering Chloe's input, and his introduction of Amber as a parental figure without proper preparation or assessment of her readiness for that role. Morrison paused, and I could hear him flipping through pages. But the most damaging finding was about emotional attunement. Dr. Santos found that while Derek can provide material advantages, he consistently fails to recognize or respond appropriately to Chloe's emotional cues and developmental needs. What about Amber? Dr. Santos was diplomatically brutal. She noted that while Amber appears well-intentioned, she lacks basic understanding of child development and has unrealistic expectations about 8-year-old behavior. She specifically mentioned Amber's frustration with normal childhood messiness and her inability to engage with Chloe's interests or emotional needs. I closed my eyes, feeling 2 years of constant worry finally begin to release from my shoulders. What happens now? Derek will undoubtedly challenge the report, possibly request a second evaluation. But Lisa, Dr. Santos interviewed 12 collateral witnesses, conducted extensive psychological testing, and spent over 30 hours observing all parties. Her findings are comprehensive and well documented. Any judge would be hard-pressed to ignore her recommendations. That afternoon, Derek called my phone 17 times. I let every call go to voicemail, finally listening to his messages after Chloe went to bed. His tone evolved from confused to angry to desperate across the series of recordings. "Lisa, I don't understand what lies you told that evaluator, but this isn't over. You're poisoning my daughter against me, and I won't stand for it. This is insane. I can provide Chloe with opportunities you never could, and you're sabotaging her future out of spite." The final message was different, his voice cracking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Lisa, please call me back. We need to figure out what's best for Chloe. This can't be what's best for her." But I knew Derek well enough to recognize manipulation disguised as vulnerability. His sudden concern for Chloe's well-being had emerged only after Dr. Santos's report threatened his legal position. For 8 years, I'd been the one figuring out what was best for Chloe, often despite Derek's interference or indifference. The final custody hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Morrison warned me that Derek's legal team would likely attack Dr. Santos's methodology, question her qualifications, and present alternative interpretations of her findings. They might also introduce new evidence or witnesses in a last-ditch attempt to discredit the evaluation. Prepare yourself for them to get personal, Morrison said during our final strategy session. When Derek's type of control-focused personality faces losing, they often escalate to character assassination. Don't take the bait. Stay calm, stay truthful, and trust that Judge Brennan has seen this playbook before. I spent the week leading up to the hearing documenting our normal routines, taking photos of Chloe's artwork displayed throughout our apartment, recording her practicing piano with the focused concentration she'd developed over years of patient instruction. I wanted to remember these details not because I expected to lose, but because I wanted to preserve the evidence of what we'd built together. Chloe sensed the tension despite my efforts to maintain normalcy. She asked fewer questions but gave more hugs, as if her 8-year-old intuition understood that something significant was approaching. The night before the hearing, she climbed into my bed after I'd tucked her in. "Mommy, tomorrow is the day the judge decides stuff, right?" "Yes, sweetheart. But remember, whatever happens, you'll always be my daughter and I'll always be your mommy." "I know. I just want to stay here with you. Is it okay to want that?" My throat tightened. It's absolutely okay to want that. And it's okay to tell anyone who asks you exactly how you feel. Even if it hurts Daddy's feelings? Even then. Your feelings matter, and grown-ups are supposed to handle their own feelings. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching the somber mood, as I dressed in my most professional outfit. Monica had driven down from Seattle to be there for moral support, and Rachel took the day off work to attend the hearing. Having them in the courtroom gallery made me feel less alone as I faced what could be the most important day of my life, as a mother. Derek arrived with his usual entourage: Hartman, 2 associate attorneys, and Amber wearing a severe black suit that made her look like she was attending a funeral. Derek's face was set in grim determination, but I noticed he avoided making eye contact with me as we took our places at opposite tables. Judge Brennan called the court to order with her characteristic efficiency. "We're here for final arguments in the matter of Walsh versus Harper regarding custody modification. I've reviewed Dr. Santos's comprehensive evaluation report, and I'll hear arguments from both parties before making my ruling." Hartman stood first, his opening statement focusing on procedural challenges to Dr. Santos's evaluation. He questioned her interview methodology, suggested her conclusions were based on insufficient observation time, and argued that her recommendations failed to consider Chloe's long-term educational and social development needs. "Your Honor, Dr. Santos spent a total of 6 hours observing Mr. Walsh's household, compared to 9 hours observing Ms. Harper's household. This disparity calls into question the fairness and accuracy of her comparative assessment." He presented charts showing Derek's superior financial resources, Amber's college education, and the educational opportunities available in Derek's school district. It was the same surface-level argument we'd expected, dressed up in new language but fundamentally unchanged. "Furthermore," Hartman continued, "Ms. Rodriguez has expressed genuine commitment to assuming maternal responsibilities for Chloe. She's enrolled in parenting classes and has demonstrated flexibility in adapting her lifestyle to accommodate a child's needs." I almost snorted at this last claim. Amber's flexibility had consisted mainly of complaining about child-proofing requirements and objecting to Chloe's normal 8-year-old sleep schedule, interfering with adult entertainment choices. When Morrison stood for our response, his tone was measured but confident. "Your Honor, Mr. Hartman's arguments perfectly illustrate the fundamental flaw in his client's approach to this case. He's focusing on external advantages while ignoring the core question: where does Chloe Harper feel safe, understood, and emotionally supported?" Morrison presented Dr. Santos's findings methodically, highlighting Derek's pattern of decision-making that prioritized appearances over Chloe's actual preferences, his illegal acquisition of confidential medical records, and his public announcement about Amber's role without considering the impact on Chloe. Most significantly, Your Honor, Dr. Santos documented that during her private interview, Chloe spontaneously drew pictures of her life with Ms. Harper that showed joy, security, and emotional connection. When asked to draw her experiences at Mr. Walsh's house, she drew herself sitting alone in a large room, with adult figures in the background engaged in their own activities. Morrison displayed copies of these drawings on the easel, and I saw Judge Brennan lean forward to examine them more closely. The contrast was stark. Bright, detailed pictures full of activity and connection versus sparse, isolated images that spoke volumes about a child's emotional experience. Dr. Santos also noted that Mr. Walsh consistently interrupted Chloe during their joint interview, correcting her statements and redirecting her responses. This behavior suggests a parent more concerned with controlling his daughter's narrative than understanding her actual feelings. Hartman objected to this characterization, but Judge Brennan overruled him. Morrison continued building his case, methodically dismantling Derek's claims about stability and suitability, while demonstrating the genuine emotional security Chloe experienced in my care. The most dramatic moment came when Morrison addressed Derek's illegal investigation of my private records. Your Honor, Mr. Walsh hired private investigators to fraudulently obtain confidential medical information about Ms. Harper. This wasn't an overzealous attorney making questionable ethical choices. This was a deliberate decision by Mr. Walsh to violate privacy laws and professional boundaries in pursuit of custody modification. Judge Brennan's expression darkened as Morrison detailed the extent of Derek's information-gathering campaign. Mr. Walsh demonstrated that when faced with a legal challenge, his response is to break laws rather than rely on legitimate evidence. This behavior raises serious questions about his judgment and character as a parent. When both sides rested their arguments, Judge Brennan announced a 30-minute recess to review the materials before rendering her decision. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. I sat in the courthouse cafe with Monica and Rachel, unable to eat or drink anything, replaying every argument and wondering if we'd done enough. Derek and his team huddled in intense conversation at a corner table, their body language suggesting heated disagreement about strategy or expectations. Amber sat slightly apart from them, scrolling through her phone with the detached air of someone who'd mentally checked out of the proceedings. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Brennan's demeanor was serious but not ominous. She'd arranged the case files and Dr. Santos's report in neat stacks, suggesting she'd reached a clear decision. I've considered all arguments and evidence presented in this matter, including Dr. Santos's comprehensive evaluation report. I want to begin by addressing Mr. Walsh's procedural challenges to the evaluation methodology. Judge Brennan looked directly at Derek's table. Dr. Santos is a court-approved evaluator with 15 years of experience in custody assessments. Her methodology is sound, her observations were extensive, and her conclusions are well supported by documented evidence. I find no basis for questioning the validity of her evaluation. My heart began beating faster as Judge Brennan continued. More importantly, I'm deeply troubled by the evidence of Mr. Walsh's illegal acquisition of confidential medical records. This behavior demonstrates a willingness to violate laws and ethical boundaries when pursuing personal objectives. Such judgment is incompatible with the responsibilities of primary custody. Derek's face went pale as Judge Brennan addressed the core custody question. The fundamental issue before this court is what custody arrangement serves Chloe Harper's best interests. While Mr. Walsh can provide material advantages, Dr. Santos's evaluation clearly demonstrates that emotional security and developmental appropriateness are more important factors for this child's well-being. She paused, consulting her notes before delivering the decisive statement. Dr. Santos found that Chloe consistently expresses preference for her current living arrangement, demonstrates emotional security in Ms. Harper's care, and shows signs of stress and confusion regarding the proposed changes to her primary residence. Therefore, Mr. Walsh's motion for custody modification is denied. Ms. Harper will retain primary custody of Chloe Harper. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I had to grip the table edge to keep from collapsing. Morrison squeezed. my shoulder, and I could hear Monica crying quietly behind me. But Judge Brennan wasn't finished. However, I am modifying the visitation schedule based on Dr. Santos's recommendations. Mr. Walsh's visitation will be supervised for a period of 6 months while he completes court-approved parenting classes focused on child development and emotional attunement. Derek shot to his feet. Your Honor, supervised visitation is completely unnecessary. I've never posed any danger to my daughter. Judge Brennan's voice was stern. Mr. Walsh, Dr. Santos documented multiple instances of your failure to recognize or appropriately respond to Chloe's emotional needs. Supervised visitation will ensure that future interactions prioritize your daughter's well-being over your desire to control the narrative of your relationship. She continued outlining the specific requirements: weekly 2-hour supervised visits at a family visitation center, completion of a parenting program within 90 days, and a follow-up evaluation before consideration of unsupervised visitation restoration. Additionally, both parties are ordered to complete co-parenting counseling to establish better communication patterns and conflict resolution strategies. Ms. Rodriguez will not be permitted to participate in visitation until Mr. Walsh demonstrates consistent appropriate parenting during supervised sessions. As Judge Brennan concluded the hearing and dismissed the court, I felt a profound sense of vindication mixed with sadness for what this process had cost everyone involved. Derek had gambled everything on a legal strategy based on manipulation and financial leverage, and he'd lost spectacularly. Outside the courthouse, Derek approached me one final time while our lawyers finalized paperwork details. His face was drawn, his confident demeanor completely shattered. Lisa, I need you to know I was trying to do what I thought was best for Chloe. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the man who'd threatened my family's stability, but the father who'd never learned how to love his daughter without trying to control her story. Derek, the best thing you can do for Chloe now is learn what Dr. Santos tried to teach you. She doesn't need you to be perfect or impressive. She needs you to see who she actually is and love that person. He nodded, tears in his eyes for the first time since I'd known him. Will you help me? With the co-parenting counseling, I mean. Will you really try to make this work? For Chloe's sake, yes. But Derek, this has to be the end of trying to replace or control our family. Chloe has a mother who knows her and loves her. You can be a wonderful father to her without trying to be anything more than that. 6 months later, I sat in the same auditorium at the Riverside Community Arts Center, watching Chloe perform at her spring recital. She'd chosen a challenging piece by Debussy, her fingers moving with the confidence that comes from patience and practice. In the audience, Derek sat 3 rows behind me, applauding enthusiastically but appropriately when she finished. The supervised visitation had been difficult at first, but gradually Derek had begun learning to interact with Chloe without trying to orchestrate her responses. The parenting classes had taught him to recognize her emotional cues and respond with support rather than correction. Most importantly, he'd stopped trying to compete with me for her affection and started focusing on building his own authentic relationship with her. Amber was no longer part of the equation. According to Patricia, the relationship had ended quietly. When Amber realized that dating Derek meant accepting genuine parental responsibilities rather than playing house with a well-behaved child on weekends. After the recital, Chloe ran to me with the excitement of someone who'd accomplished something difficult and wonderful. Did you hear how I didn't miss any of the hard parts? I heard every beautiful note, I said, hugging her tightly. I'm so proud of how hard you worked on that piece. Derek approached us, his demeanor respectful but warm. Chloe, that was incredible. You've really grown as a musician. She beamed at his praise, then looked between us with the satisfied expression of a child whose world finally makes sense. Can we all go get ice cream together? To celebrate? Derek and I exchanged glances, both understanding the significance of her question. It wasn't about wanting us to be a family again, but about wanting the adults in her life to get along well enough to share her happy moments. "I think that sounds like a perfect way to celebrate," I said. As we walked out of the recital hall, together, Chloe chattering about her plans for learning an even harder piece next year, I reflected on how much had changed since that terrible night when Derek had tried to rewrite our family story, according to his own needs and ambitions. The truth had been simpler than his complicated legal strategies and character assassinations. Chloe belonged where she felt known, loved, and free to be exactly who she was. That place was home with me, but it also included space for Derek to be the father she deserved, once he learned how to see her clearly. At the ice cream shop, Chloe ordered her usual strawberry with rainbow sprinkles, and for the first time in over a year, she seemed completely relaxed in the presence of both her parents. She told Derek about her art class and her new friend at school, and he listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was beginning to understand who she really was, rather than who he wanted her to become. When Derek dropped us off at our apartment that evening, Chloe hugged him goodbye without any of the tension that had characterized their interactions during the custody battle. As his car pulled away, she slipped her hand into mine. "Mommy, I'm glad we get to stay here together." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." That night, after Chloe fell asleep surrounded by her carefully arranged stuffed animals in her own room in our small apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about everything we'd survived. Derek's attempt to replace our family with his version of perfection had ultimately forced us all to confront what really mattered: authentic love over impressive appearances, emotional security over material advantages, and a child's right to be heard and understood rather than managed and controlled. The legal victory had been important, but the real triumph was simpler. Chloe was home where she belonged. Derek was learning to be the father she needed rather than the one his ego demanded. And I had finally stopped apologizing for being exactly the mother she deserved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.